Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to be covering all 30 NBA teams again in this video. This time we're going to take a look at every single team's best individual trade asset for the 2025 NBA trade deadline. I'm really excited for it. I hope you are as well. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you do enjoy today. Then also in our video preview here, let's break down exactly what we're looking at in this video. So we're going to talk about the most valuable asset that every single NBA team has leading up to the 2025 NBA trade deadline. However, that would be extremely predictable. For the Dallas Mavericks, it would be Luka Doncic. For the San Antonio Spurs, it would be Victor Wembanyama. For Milwaukee, it would be Giannis Antetokounmpo. So the important caveat in today's video is that we are talking about assets that very likely or potentially could be traded. So you won't see Victor Wembanyama, you won't see Giannis Antetokounmpo in today's video. Now, what you will see across different teams is potentially a player, potentially a movable contract that opens up some flexibility. You could see a draft pick or multiple draft picks, maybe even a trade exception. Every single NBA team has a different background, a different goal right now, a different roster, and a different collection of movable pieces. And I think with that in mind, this video is going to do a good job detailing all of those different scenarios and situations. And it will also give you a good overview of what your team has to offer and also what's the best thing other teams have to offer moving forward as well. So let's get into it here with the Atlanta Hawks, who have the Sacramento Kings 2025 first round pick, which is top 12 protected. On top of that, Atlanta has the Lakers 2025 first unprotected, part of the DeJounte Murray to New Orleans trade. The Hawks now sitting with 2 first round picks in 2025, and they are loaded with Clint Capella's contract to potentially move in a deal as well. He's making a little bit over $20 million this season. I think the Hawks are a fascinating team to watch at the trade deadline. Unfortunately for Atlanta, Jalen Johnson is out for the season with a torn labrum. He will undergo surgery. That is from some of the most recent reporting from Shams Charania. But I think the overall situation here in Atlanta is continuing to look to upgrade for talent, find pieces that could fit around Trae Young and around some of their other core nucleus, whether that be Jalen Johnson going into future seasons or Zachary Sachet, who is their number 1 overall pick in 2024. There's a variety of different ways that Atlanta would like to build, of course, around their young nucleus, that it also features Dyson Daniels. And I think trading Clint Capella while Onyeka Okongwu has assumed the starting center spot there for the Hawks makes the most sense at this point in time. Capella's expiring contract, plus 2 first-round picks, including this Kings first, which could be a possible lottery pick, even if it ends up being at pick 13 or 14, I think could be a unique trade point to start discussions with other teams for a slight but important win now move for the Atlanta Hawks this season. Then we could look at the Boston Celtics, who have Jaden Springer's contract making a little bit over $4 million and their own 2025 first round pick. Now, the Celtics as a second apron team are very limited in trades. They can't trade multiple salaries together. They cannot aggregate players together. They also probably want to maintain a lot of their future draft flexibility because of some of those CBA restrictions that are going to really hurt them in terms of draft pick freezing starting in the 2032 draft. That will prevent Boston from ultimately trading their own draft picks away moving into future years after 2032 and beyond. So I think if you're looking at Boston trying to find ways to creatively improve their roster while also keep their core intact, this package of Jaden Springer plus this year's first round pick is probably Boston's easiest, most successful pathway to finding a small improvement if they're looking for some other player who's on a smaller contract making less than Jaden Springer. There is something out there that Boston could theoretically do with this package. Now, it's going to be hard to find a player making such little money that could be an upgrade into their roster or into their rotation. For the most part, I think Boston stands pat, but this is probably the best package of collection of assets that they realistically could look to move at the 2025 NBA trade deadline. Then we'll take a look at the Brooklyn Nets, and I think this one's point blank very obvious. Cam Johnson, he's flirting with a 50-40-90 season, averaging nearly 20 points per game for this season for the Brooklyn Nets. And one, he's a byproduct of Jordi Fernandez. I think Fernandez has really proven himself early on as a great head coach. And the Nets, honestly, have been overachieving in a lot of ways. Dennis Schroeder was overachieving. You think about Dorian Finney-Smith, how successful he was early in the season before getting traded to Los Angeles. And now Cam Johnson as well, just another example of a player who is playing the best basketball of his career under Jordi Fernandez. And I think the Nets are going to try and cash in on Cam Johnson. He's worth at least 2 first-round picks plus other assets. Of course, matching salary is going to be in the deal. I think for Brooklyn, if they're going to get something from Cam Johnson, watch for it to be an expiring salary. Cam Johnson has a couple years left on his deal after this season. If the Nets take an expiring salary, they could be loaded with about $80+ million in cap space this offseason, which would be an absolutely huge amount to build their roster further. They would have a cap hold, a very small cap hold on Cam Thomas. They, of course, have Nick Claxton under contract. And I think Brooklyn loaded with a ton of draft picks, a ton of capital to go out, either make trades, improve their roster via the market and the trade block, or through free agency, are going to look to very quickly renovate and rebuild this team. And trading Cam Johnson might be one of the final moves that they make as a teardown unit before going out and spending big time in free agency this upcoming summer. Now we look at the Charlotte Hornets, and their top asset to work with at this point in time is Cody Martin. Of course, I'm not going to include draft picks here. I don't see Charlotte trading any draft picks out the door this upcoming trade deadline. You think back to what they did last year, trading Terry Rozier, trading PJ Washington, both for 2027 first-round picks. I think the Hornets are on a good pathway. Now, I didn't love the Tidjane Salon draft pick in 2024. I was not a big believer of his game, but I still think overall the Hornets with LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and Mark Williams have a pretty interesting young infrastructure of pieces there. Hopefully Salon can develop and grow as a player. We'll see what happens. I'm kind of withholding hope at this point, but we'll see. He's still extremely young and raw. We knew this coming into the draft. So Cody Martin might be their best veteran to move. Could they get a collection of second-round picks, maybe 2 or 3 second-rounders down the road to open up either future trade flexibility if they get, say, 2 or 3 picks from a contending team in the 2028, 2029 drafts for second-rounders? And you might say, well, that's not very valuable. As of right now, it's not, but I think getting those 2 draft assets down the road could help Charlotte finagle, figure out other deals that they want to make later on, try and sweeten deals, get something done. And honestly, for Cody Martin, at this point in time, I think the Hornets would be okay moving on from him anyway. Cody Martin, probably their most valued asset around the league at this point in time as it stands. The Chicago Bulls have a few different players to talk about, Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball. I really want to talk about Lonzo Ball first here. He's vastly different, obviously, than Zach LaVine and what his trade value would be. Now, he hasn't had the most efficient season coming back from his injuries. It's been a big uphill battle for him. It's been, first of all, great to see him actually back out on an NBA court this season. And then also, the value for Lonzo Ball might be extremely high for contending teams looking for stopgap fill-in players. Lonzo Ball's on an expiring contract, could be looked at as an affordable short-term rental. A bunch of teams around the league have the money to get to Lonzo Ball's number if they want to, and I don't think the Bulls would be really expecting too much in return. Maybe a few second-round picks instead of what the hope is for Zach LaVine, which is a bigger trade to materialize. So Lonzo Ball, if you look at his skill set, most people are going to label him as a point guard. If you've really watched Lonzo Ball play, he's more of an off-ball wing who has point guard feel and vision, and I think there's a significant difference between those two categories and criteria. If Lonzo Ball got traded to the Dallas Mavericks, for example, or to Milwaukee, or if he got traded to some team that has a superstar type player there, Lonzo Ball would not have the ball in his hands a ton. He would be a spot-up guy off of that, a cutter, someone who gets out in transition, makes the extra pass, is a connecting piece offensively off the wing, and then also, yes, you can throw him in a pick and roll. You can have him handle the ball a bit. And I think that's what makes him so valuable is the on-ball, off-ball capabilities and the congruence of those two things together for a contending team. Plus, of course, the defensive versatility, cards up and down the lineup pretty well. And I think hopefully if he's able to stay healthy and really get his body back completely right, maybe this is a huge swing for a team, because not only are you trading for Lonzo Ball this season, you're also trading for his bird rights going into the 2025 offseason. And Zach LaVine, I have him in a Milwaukee Bucks jersey here on the graphic. I think there's a really good chance he finds his way to Milwaukee this trade deadline. And I think the Bulls are in a position where if they can get Zach LaVine traded as part of either some type of salary dump where they have to take in Bradley Beal, it's probably Chicago's best long-term way to actually get meaningful draft capital for Zach LaVine by also swallowing some other contract, which is equally as bad, if not worse. You guys know how I feel about Beal's contract. It's terrible. But the Bulls, I think, could be in play here as a team to trade both Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball this deadline. The Cleveland Cavaliers here with Max Strus being their best trade candidate. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, saying how Max Strus could potentially be a player they trade to even dip below the tax line, which would be very interesting because the Cavaliers have been nothing short of spectacular this year. Very rare do you see a team like Cleveland, with the record that they have, trying to dip below the tax, but they're very, very close to the tax line. And Strus is only playing 18 games at the time I'm recording this. It's something that I think could make sense. Now, he is shooting about 38% from three, so I'm not trying to insinuate that he's not valuable. They could also look at moving Karis LeVert, although I think Strus might be the more sensible option to move. We'll see what Cleveland does. Ultimately, I could see them just standing pat, keeping pretty much their entire core together, keeping the roster as is, and I would not fault them for that decision at all. Now on to the Dallas Mavericks, and I think Dallas is very fascinating. They have their own 2031 first-round pick, and they have a couple of different salaries they could maybe include. There's been some rumors about Daniel Gafford, but a recent injury to Maxi Kleber makes me believe that if Dallas is looking for an upgrade, and they really might need one right now because of the injuries to Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving missing a little bit of time this year, Derek Lively out, Maxi Kleber now out with injury. The Mavericks have really stumbled in the standings, down outside of the top 8 now in the Western Conference playoff picture, and I think with that in mind, the Mavericks might need to put their 2031 first-round pick out in the market. They may need to offer it to teams to try and get a deal done, and they could use Maxi Kleber's contract as the salary filler to get a deal done. Now, there are some tricky stipulations here. The Mavericks are hard capped at the first apron. They're very, very, very tight to the first apron as is right now. So it would be a tricky task to get a deal done. And then also, which GMs, which teams are willing to actually trade for a 2031 first round pick. The reason I have that ellipsis here, the ... I could see Dallas working with a team like Oklahoma City or like Utah or like San Antonio, where this 2031 first goes to one of those teams, and the Spurs or the Thunder or the Utah Jazz trade more draft capital to team number 3, whether that be like the New Orleans Pelicans for Herb Jones or Destination X, Y, or Z for whichever player. A 3-team deal is what makes the most sense for Dallas, similar to what they did last year to acquire Daniel Gafford. OKC helped them out big time in that trade. I would not be shocked if we see something similar again this trade deadline, with this 2031 first round pick being the real cream of the crop asset that the third team in the deal, like OKC or San Antonio, would really want. On to the Denver Nuggets, and I think their premier trade chip this trade deadline is Michael Porter Jr. Now, I actually really don't think the Nuggets are going to be extremely active, but there's been reports and rumors about the Nuggets exploring a variety of different high-cost veteran players. There's been some reports about Jimmy Butler even. There's been reports about Zach LaVine. And how would the Nuggets get to that money? It would really revolve and stem from Michael Porter Jr.'s contract. Now, again, I don't think Michael Porter Jr. gets traded. He shoots the ball way too darn well to get traded. And I think Denver, the team that shoots the least amount of threes in the NBA already, as it currently stands, really can't afford to trade him. But again, internally, that front office doesn't value three-point shooting like the remainder of the league does. So could Michael Porter Jr. be on the move? I don't want to say no. There's so many players in the league that for the right price could get moved, for the right package could be on their way to another city. But I just don't think it's very likely we see Michael Porter Jr. get traded at the trade deadline in 2025. Now on to the Detroit Pistons, and their best trade asset is their cap space. They have over $14 million in cap space going into the 2025 NBA trade deadline. They're the only NBA team in the league with actual real cap space. And they could use it in a variety of ways, which is exactly what this graphic is meant to show. They could use it to eat a contract like Pat Connaughton of the Milwaukee Bucks, someone who Milwaukee is extremely motivated to get off of and would be willing to attach some form of draft compensation to his contract to trade him to get under the second apron and open up other trade flexibility in that process. The Pistons could also use it to make an upgrade within that cap space. Someone like Cam Thomas, who is a smaller contract. You think about Jaden Ivey being out with injury right now. A lot of the ball handling responsibilities have really fallen on Cade Cunningham's shoulders. Now, he's had an awesome season for himself. I think Cade Cunningham is an all-star level player, an awesome young player, and someone who is the face of the franchise for the Detroit Pistons moving forward. But I think we've also seen some of the difficulties that come with being such a high-usage, high-volume ball handler without another lead ball handler next to you. I think Cam Thomas could maybe soothe some of that pressure, relieve some of that pressure for him, and also give Detroit another guy to go and get buckets in their offense. And I think that would be really tremendous to see. And then Brandon Ingram, maybe the biggest name to watch for Detroit, making $36 million as an expiring contract this year. Now, he would hit unrestricted free agency, very likely, very potentially. So I think that's a real risk and ramification of any potential Pistons-Pelicans trade. But you think about the GM relationship there. Trajan Langdon just came over to Detroit this past offseason from New Orleans. Could he look at bringing Brandon Ingram with him from New Orleans to Detroit? Very possibly. I think the Pelicans will be very motivated to get out from the tax, and I think Brandon Ingram as a player is going to be the guy who's very likely potentially moved at the deadline in that process. The Golden State Warriors, in pursuit of either Jimmy Butler or Nikola Vucevic, could utilize their 2026 and 2028 first-round picks. Now, they technically do have their 2027 first and their 2031 first available as well, but the Stepien rule does prevent this a little bit. They actually owe their pick, numbers 21 through 30 in the 2030 draft, to the Washington Wizards for taking in the Jordan Poole contract. So it's a top 20 protection in 2030. And with that in mind, now the 2031 pick is actually X'd out, crossed out. You can't trade that pick now if you're Golden State. So 2026, we're going to work with the even years, or 2028 are the picks that would be very possibly movable if you're Golden State. Now, with the reports that Pat Riley and the Heat have lowered the asking price on Jimmy Butler, I do not want to completely eliminate or rule out the Warriors from any trade for Butler, but also Vucevic has continued to be a hot name. I think for the Warriors, who are a smaller team, still could use some more skilled size specifically, and I always go back to their post splits. They're such a great post split team. That's one of their primary half-court offensive actions that they run a ton, that of course has been so successful with Draymond and Steph throughout all these years. And I think if you put Vucevic in there, who has a back-to-the-basket game, has touch around the rim, and has some playmaking feel, if you go back to his Orlando days especially, Vucevic could be a unique fit with Steph Curry, with Draymond Green, as kind of a hub of your offense out of the low post and allowing the Warriors to get to those post splits a little bit more frequently and a little bit more often. Would be a fascinating thing to see if the Warriors do decide to use one or maybe two first-round picks in trades this deadline. The Houston Rockets have the Phoenix Suns first-round draft capital to work with in the years 2025, 2027, and 2029, but I don't find it extremely likely that the Rockets trade any of these assets this year. They also have expiring salaries. I wanted to include that as well in Steven Adams, in Jock Landale, in Jeff Green, and Jae'Sean Tate. The Rockets have a lot of flexibility. They have so much draft capital to work with. If you ask me which one's the most valuable, this trio of Suns picks, in my opinion, is what's going to be the most valuable collection of assets that Houston ultimately has. Now, they also do have a swap option with Brooklyn in 2027, which is extremely valuable. The Rockets are very, very well loaded, not only with good young talent right now as they're winning a lot of games in the NBA presently, but they're also a team that is really set up for some future moves. We'll see if anything ever materializes. I don't expect it to be this trade deadline, though. It looks more like a 2025 offseason kind of thing, if I had to guess, for the Houston Rockets. Now the Indiana Pacers here, and Myles Turner just cannot keep his name out of trade rumors. Feels like pretty much 80% of Myles Turner's career has spent in trade rumor circulation, where pretty much a lot of teams would want to have Myles Turner. He blocks shots at the rim. He's shooting almost 40% from three this season on very good three-point volume for a center especially. I don't really understand. His name continues to pop up in trade rumors, and that might be a testament to how many teams actually are interested in acquiring him. But it also might paint a picture on Indiana maybe being willing to include him in trades. So far, the Pacers have never found a trade for Myles Turner that they've been willing to accept and actually deal him for. Could that change in the 2025 NBA trade deadline? Potentially. I hope not for Indiana. I think his fit with Tyrese Halliburton is essential. You think about their matchups in the Eastern Conference playoffs against New York and Karl Anthony Towns in drop coverage, against Brook Lopez and Milwaukee in drop coverage. I think Myles Turner is a very essential fit into the overall offensive picture here for Indiana. I think trading him, just given the fact that you're not going to get elite value probably, even though he's such an instrumental player on your team, leads me to believe that they should not trade him, but you never say never in the NBA, so we'll see what happens with Myles Turner this trade deadline. Now on to the LA Clippers, and PJ Tucker's contract and second round draft capital is what the Clippers have to work with. Now, they also do have their 2031 first, but do I see that actually getting dealt? No, there's some stipulations and issues with that as well. So For me, I think PJ Tucker, his $11 million expiring contract, is a very movable asset at the trade deadline here, and one that teams will be okay with taking if they get second round draft capital as well. So the Clippers have a little bit of trade flexibility here without even hurting their roster. Look at this. You get to see on the graphic what PJ Tucker would have looked like in his Clippers jersey this year had he actually shown up and played games for the Clippers. That has not been the case, of course, but the Clippers still have his contract and are willing and able to move him at any given moment here for a player who could be an actual meaningful upgrade into their rotation, which I think is super, super important to note leading up to the 2025 NBA trade deadline. The Los Angeles Lakers have their own 2 first-round picks in 2029 and 2031 to work with. However, I don't know if I really see the Lakers making a huge big splash trade. They obviously would be a team that has reported interest in Myles Turner. They're looking for big men. There's a variety of different names that could maybe fulfill some of the, I think, aspirations of Anthony Davis and LeBron James internally to win, to push the Lakers further toward contention. However, if the Lakers are just a little bit more patient, they open up even more trade flexibility once we get to the offseason and to the NBA draft, because they would have, the ability to include 2032 firsts in this as well, and try and work out deals where they could include an extra swap option. Maybe they try and save their assets for the future of the Los Angeles Lakers rather than the current day iteration of this team. Do they want to try and make a run at Trae Young in the future? Do they want to try and make a run at De'Aaron Fox if Fox is still available in the offseason? There's a variety of different ways that the Lakers could look to operate, and I just don't know if I see them making a huge splash trade at the deadline here that would include either one of these first-round picks, let alone both of them. Now we're on to the Memphis Grizzlies, and you talk about first-round picks. Oh my goodness, look at the Grizzlies. They own all of their own first-round picks. They also have some swap options included in 2026 and 2030, part of the David Roddy trade with the Phoenix Suns last year. The Grizzlies are very, very well equipped. They have numerous amounts of draft picks. They have all of their own flexibility. For a while, I've been saying I think they should be considered the favorite to land Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. I think he would be a brilliant fit into their starting lineup. He's already extended. His contract is very cost controlled. I think for his production level and his talent level, it's a very fair, well-balanced contract that a team would love to have on their books. And I think for Memphis specifically, they're the team that makes the most sense to look for a win-now upgrade. They're top 3 in the Western Conference at the time I'm recording this by standings. They have a really good young core nucleus, a team that's ready to win now. They have a lot of their core booked together for a while. They have a lot of depth. They have a lot of young talent, and they have the draft capital to go out and make something happen. Cam Johnson to Memphis, I think, makes all the sense in the world. We'll see if they actually pull the trigger. They have Marcus Smart's contract to work with, but their most valuable assets are these draft picks, the ones that they're going to be able to include in any kind of deal. They could put together a variety of different packages, whether it be even number years, odd number years, maybe some swaps included. Memphis has a lot of flexibility, and they can offer that to get a meaningful upgrade into their starting lineup right now if they so choose. The Miami Heat, I think this one's very, very clear. Jimmy Butler is their most valuable trade asset. However, it's not like his value is as high as it should be, and I think this is a disclaimer part of the video. The Miami Heat will not get fair value for Jimmy Butler. As a byproduct of how he's been acting over the last couple of months, his play has not really matched the name brand that Jimmy Butler, you would assume he has. He's averaging less than his career average in points this season. So I think that's something that where if you're looking at, trading for a 35-year-old forward, it's a little risky if you're another team. And I think given the fact that he's potentially an unrestricted free agent, has a player option he'll probably opt into, but you never know. He could opt out and extend instead. So Jimmy Butler, they're not going to get fair value for him, but the Heat will trade him. This is their most valuable, most important trade to figure out at the deadline, and they'll get it done relatively soon. The Milwaukee Bucks have the 2031 first-round pick. So we already talked about Zach LaVine potentially being a Milwaukee Buck and how that would come to fruition through a multi-team trade. If Jimmy Butler goes to Phoenix or Golden State, the Bucks could try and jump in, get involved after salary dumping Pat Connaughton somewhere. And this 2031 first-round pick would be what they would look to attach with either Chris Middleton and or Bobby Portis to get some kind of deal done with Chicago for Zach LaVine. God forbid Bradley Beal ends up in Milwaukee. I think that would be terrible for the Bucks. But ultimately, Zach LaVine, I think, is the name to continue watching. There's also a contingency of Bucks fans who really want to see Myles Turner there. I just have a realistic question that I need to ask you guys, though. Why would the Pacers trade Myles Turner to the Bucks when both teams are Eastern Conference playoff teams? Like, yes, I know Myles Turner's on an expiring contract. I just don't think that Indiana wants to see talent walk out the door to an Eastern Conference rival, though. It would be shocking to me if the Pacers traded Myles Turner to Milwaukee. I would absolutely love that for the Bucks if it materialized, but I don't expect it to at the 2025 NBA trade deadline regarding Myles Turner. Now on to the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they have their 2025 first-round pick via the Detroit Pistons. And it's funny, when they got this deal in the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, I don't think we were expecting them to be able to really utilize this pick as a trade chip or a draft pick this year because of the protections on it. It is top 13 protected, but the Pistons have been playing really good basketball as a team lately. They are now a team that is within playoff range. So this is a serious draft asset, just like we talked about with the Kings earlier, that theoretically could be anywhere from pick 14 to pick 18, 19. The Wolves have an asset here that they could either use to stick, pick, and draft, or to try and attach to Julius Randle's contract to make something else happen. And I think the Wolves find themselves in a tricky spot of balancing their long-term cap sheet. How do they look at their salary cap table over the next few years and make sure everything's in order to best prepare winning for Anthony Edwards' entire prime, while without sacrificing this season as a result. And I think right now we're at kind of the crisis point of this season might be almost sacrificed as it is. And if they don't trade Julius Randle now with this pick, I just don't know if they're going to get the value that they're looking for this season and beyond. So I think we're at a real mesh point here right now for Minnesota where they have to figure something out and figure it out quick before the trade deadline gets here if they want to make a move. Now, I know Chris Finch internally really likes Julius Randle. I don't think he feels a lot of pressure, but Tim Connolly, he's been known to make aggressive big moves in the past, and I don't want to rule that out at this trade deadline either. Now on to the New Orleans Pelicans, and very, very clearly, very pointedly, their best trade asset is Herb Jones. Now, I talked about Brandon Ingram. I think Brandon Ingram very likely gets traded. Herb Jones, and I don't want to mince my words here, Herb Jones is by far the most valuable player that the Pelicans have to offer at this trade deadline. His contract is extremely cheap. He fits on every single contender. Herb Jones isn't even shooting the ball very well this season. In fact, he's having a career worst season in terms of his overall efficiency as a scorer, but he is still the most valuable player on the Pelicans roster. If he were to become available on the trade market, a two-way player like Herb Jones with playmaking feel, has been a historically solid three-point shooter in the NBA. And then you also look at who he's able to guard night to night on the perimeter, able to switch on to bigs a little bit, able to be a disruptor off the ball, on the ball, guards every which way. He's an elite nail gap helper. He does a little bit of everything defensively. This is a premier player. This is a player that if Dallas or if Denver or if Phoenix or if any team, Boston, whatever, could get their hands on Herb Jones, they would all scratch, crawl, fight, and try as hard as they can to land him. And that's a testament to Herb Jones as a player. And if the Pelicans make him available, there will be a real bidding war to land the services of Herb Jones at this year's trade deadline. The New York Knicks, their most valuable trade asset is Mitchell Robinson and his contract. The Knicks, of course, have been very, very good this season. They have one of the better starting fives in the NBA. Think about Jalen Brunson, Karl-Anthony Towns, both all-star starter level players this year for New York. I don't think there's any shock or surprise in that statement. The Knicks are really, really good. And they have Mitchell Robinson, who can either come back and be an awesome backup big man for them. You think about the combination of size, athleticism, strength, and rebounding that he provides to the New York Knicks. That's an awesome backup big man to have. It also gives them a little bit more lineup flexibility. Thinking back to Karl-Anthony Towns playing next to Rudy Gobert, could the Knicks channel some of that with Cap playing a little bit of the four? Now, I think that's tougher in the Eastern Conference since you're either going to have to ask him to guard like Giannis or Jason Tatum. The Eastern Conference 4s and 5s are just a little bit different than the West in terms of dynamism and on-ball creation and floor stretching capabilities. And I think that's something that would be a challenge for New York to deal with if they tried to play the two bigs together often. But there's maybe a world where they could get away with it for a little bit. The Knicks aren't really in a pressure point right now where they have to trade Mitchell Robinson. But if something materialized that they liked, this is one of their best assets to try and figure out a way to get a deal done for some other player, or maybe a combination of players that make less money than Mitchell Robinson does individually. The Oklahoma City Thunder, again, I think a very clear obvious cut and dry point on who and what is the most valuable thing that they could look to trade. It's not going to be any of their players. They're not going to blow up the team. They're not going to make some giant trade for Kevin Durant. They're not going to be ridiculous. Sam Presti is very smart. What they'll do is they'll use their collection of near future first round picks to try and get distant, far out future first round picks. You look at the picks that they have this year. They've got a swap option with either Houston or LA. They've got the pick via Miami. They have the pick via Philadelphia. They have Utah's pick if something drastic happened to Utah down the stretch and they ended up sending the 11th pick over to OKC. The Thunder have so many draft assets. They're willing to expend some of these up and coming ones to help facilitate other trades, whether it be with Dallas, who we talked about earlier, and that 2031 first, whether it be with Milwaukee and that 2031 first we've talked about. Could it be with Miami, who has some far out future draft capital as well? Could OKC get involved in the Jimmy Butler trade in some way as a 4th, 5th, or 6th team, whatever number they ended up being in that? Could they get involved with Denver if Denver's trying to make an upgrade using their 2031 first round pick? OKC is like the Wolf of Wall Street. They're going to sit there, they're going to make calls, and they're going to play predator. That's all they want to do. They want to prey on teams who are desperate, who need help making trades. That's part of the benefit of hoarding and holding on to all of these first-round draft picks over the next 7 years. Teams need their help, and teams will call OKC. Sam Presti knows how to work the phones. He's always done a great job of that. Think back to the Daniel Gafford trade last year. The Thunder have been willing to help teams get deals done. And as a result, they usually come out with something that is maybe more meaningful down the road than what they had to offer in the first place to begin with. On to the Orlando Magic, who have 2 first-round picks in 2025 and their own untethered draft capital. And by untethered, I mean there's no Stepien rule stipulations right now. The Magic have pretty much a clean bill of health when it comes to their own future draft picks. So with that in mind, they could trade odd number years, they could trade even number years, and this Denver Nuggets first in 2025 opens up extra flexibility for them. If the Magic wanted to, they could trade that first and then 2026, 2028 first. There's a lot of different ways Orlando could look about trying to build up their team. Going out in the trade market, there's a few players that do make a lot of sense. You'll have to check out some future videos to see who I'm exactly pinpointing for Orlando. But I think they're in a spot right now where their draft capital is just by far their best asset to trade, because I'm not assuming any Banchero, Jalen Suggs, Wagner trades to come to fruition anytime soon. And I think Magic fans would all definitely agree with that. I considered Anthony Black possibly. He would be a very fascinating trade target for a team looking to rebuild, maybe send a veteran out the door to Orlando. We'll see if something like that materializes, but nonetheless, I think Orlando's very happy with keeping their young core intact as it currently sits. The Philadelphia 76ers have KJ Martin's $7.9 million contract to offer, and they have some draft picks. Now, the market for Philadelphia to go out and find some type of player who could change their season drastically, making less than $8 million, is very, very challenging. It's nearly impossible to really find a player who's going to override some of the problems we've seen with Philadelphia this year. So Daryl Morey might have to go back to the drawing board, might have to work pretty hard to figure something out here. But this contract gives Philadelphia some flexibility. They could try and break it up into a couple of different small salaries. If there's some expiring players that they like out there that they can maybe try and go get on, veteran minimum contracts. Like there's some ways where Philadelphia could stretch their cap table around a little bit and try and get creative. Now, KJ Martin's played pretty well this year. He's shooting above 60% from the floor, almost 40% from three. Of course, this is both, incredibly low volume, both from the field and from three. So you don't want to, hold your breath on that too much. But KJ Martin's not played poorly when he's been in the game. Now, again, do I think he's a playoff contributor for Philly? No. So I think his contract is extremely expendable for the Sixers at the deadline if they so choose. Now on to the Phoenix Suns, and they, of course, made headlines the other day by trading for 3 first-round picks with the Utah Jazz. They traded for the least favorable of the Wolves, Jazz, and Cavs picks in the years 2025, 2027, and 2029. The Suns will work aggressively to utilize these draft picks in a variety of different trades. Maybe one for Jimmy Butler, maybe one to salary dump Jusuf Nurkic somewhere and find a role player. The Suns are going to work the phones, and they're going to work the phones aggressively to see if they can get some kind of deal done, whatever that end up may looking like. I don't even know quite yet. Again, I think Jimmy Butler is the preferred option for Phoenix, but worst case, they have extra draft capital now to try and make something work with Jusuf Nurkic, try and make something work for player X, Y, or Z. This is what the Suns have to work with. These are the tradable assets. And this is all they have really left for value. So if they use these, things get scary pretty quickly in Phoenix long term. The Portland Trailblazers have Anfernee Simons' contract to move. Anfernee Simons has been very, very productive throughout the last few years of his NBA career. Now, actually, his scoring is a bit down this year. His field goal percentage, if you look at it just from that viewpoint, you're going to say, well, he's only shooting about 41, 42% from the field. How valuable is he really? But then you dig deeper into the numbers, you realize that over half of his shots are coming from three-point land. He's actually shooting the three pretty well at about 37%. He's shooting twos at about 48%. So he's been an efficient offensive player, an effective offensive player. Now, Portland doesn't have a team that's really ready to compete right now. They don't have a head coach who's ready to compete and actually win NBA games. So Anfernee Simons, while yes, he hasn't had that quote-unquote winning impact so far, I do think that he could be a player that makes sense for Orlando. He could make sense for a variety of different teams looking for a little bit of offensive juice. And his contract's not enormous. It's in the mid-20s for how many millions of dollars he makes a year, which, again, that's a lot of money to you and me. But for NBA standards, it's not like it's some untouchable contract by any stretch of the imagination. So Portland, this is their best player that they're likely going to move. Now, again, I assume they're not going to trade Toumani Camara, Shaedon Sharpe, Donovan Clingan, Scoot Henderson, of course. That's the core infrastructure. They're not going to trade those guys. So Anfernee Simons looks like maybe the best player available. Again, I'm assuming Deni Avdija does not get traded as well. The Sacramento Kings here have a collection of options. They have many different places they could theoretically trade De'Aaron Fox. And after reports and rumors are that De'Aaron Fox is available for trade, it will be fascinating to see what actually happens. He is about 16 months away from being an unrestricted free agent. And the San Antonio Spurs, the preferred destination, according to Shams Charania, from what he's heard from league circles, are a team that is poised to have cap space, max cap space in 2026. So could San Antonio try and make a run at De'Aaron Fox without even trading for him? Potentially, but when you make that gamble, when you take that risk, you also risk Sacramento just flat out maxing De'Aaron Fox. You risk Sacramento deciding that De'Aaron Fox is essential to them. Or you also risk some other team jumping in and saying, no, we'll trade for De'Aaron Fox and we'll convince him he wants to stay here, whether that be Houston or Miami or Brooklyn or maybe Golden State. There's a variety of different teams that will be interested in De'Aaron Fox. I think this sweepstakes will get really, really heated really quickly. We'll see if Sacramento actually deals him at the 25 deadline or not. The San Antonio Spurs, and some Spurs fans are already typing in the chat. I can hear your keyboards clicking right now. Listen to me, hear me out. Stephon Castle is the premier player that teams will want from San Antonio, specifically Sacramento. Sacramento would really want Stephon Castle in return. I know a lot of Spurs fans are going to say, no deal, we're not doing it. And that might be the reality. That really might be the truth. But I wanted to include Stephon Castle in this video instead of the draft capital. We all know how much draft capital San Antonio has. I think this is the type of player that could start the framework of a one-for-one type of deal with Sacramento. A few years ago, we saw the Kings basically build a player-for-player trade between Tyrese Halliburton and Domantas Sabonis. And it would be interesting to see if Monte McNair and the Sacramento Kings try and reverse that by trading now De'Aaron Fox, the more established veteran player, for a younger, lesser proven player who has immense upside. And that might be Stephon Castle in this case. Now, again, I'm not guaranteeing that Stephon Castle gets traded. I'm not saying the Spurs are going to look to even move Stephon Castle. What I'm saying is this is the player the Kings would really want in return, I'm guessing. And I don't think it's a complete non-starter for San Antonio. I don't think they're immediately hanging up the phone. Are they going to want to attach draft capital to Stephon Castle? No. And I think that's something where there's going to be a holdup on both ends, but it'll be interesting to see how these negotiations play out and what kind of reports and news we get on this as time goes by over the next couple of days. The Toronto Raptors have Bruce Brown's contract, which is an expiring contract to work with. And if you told me that Toronto got involved in the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes, it would not be shocking. I could see Bruce Brown ending up in Miami or ending up in city X, Y, or Z because of his contract. It's a big, large contract making over $20 million a season, and he's in the final year of his deal. So you're looking at a rental where a team could acquire Bruce Brown and open up flexibility by letting his contract expire. Now, they could also keep bird rights on him, try and get him back on a smaller number, which could be valuable for contending teams as well. If he's making closer to $10 to $12 million, that could be valuable. I think for Toronto here, This asset's going to open up a lot of doors for them to potentially make trades. Of course, they have other good young players. That he's not the most valuable player or asset that they have, but I think he's the most available asset that they have that's going to be super useful for other teams in trades, and that's why I think Bruce Brown's expiring contract is such an attractive piece at the trade deadline this year. The Utah Jazz will not trade Walker Kessler, even though I think he is their most valuable player in terms of trade market right now. Remember, Lauri Markkanen cannot be traded. I, in fact, think Collin Sexton is the most valuable trade asset they have. I went back and forth here between Collin Sexton and John Collins, given the fact that I don't think Walker Kessler will ultimately get traded. It left me in a weird spot where John Collins, to me, in a lot of ways, you think about a bigger forward who can shoot the ball relatively well. He's super athletic. Like, that kind of player fits in a lot of situations. But then you also consider Collin Sexton, who can be this kind of third combo guard. And we've seen a lot of success over the years, whether that was Spencer Dinwiddie when he was behind Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic in Dallas. You think about a variety of different options where having a third guard, someone like when Malcolm Brogdon was in Boston, for example, when Ime Udoka was coaching there, found a lot of success. Collin Sexton could be a very valuable player for a contending team. Two-way intensity, he defends really, really well. He's extremely strong. He's an athletic guard, and he can create off the dribble for himself. He can be a little bit of a downhill force. I think his playmaking's come a long way from where he was a few years ago as a college prospect to where he is now as an established NBA veteran. Collin Sexton's a good player and someone who I think is going to hold quite a bit of value around the league on a very friendly contract, making less than $20 million annually. Then the Washington Wizards, and Malcolm Brogdon and his expiring contract is what I picked to be the most attractive asset the Washington Wizards have. Now, I went back and forth here. They have Kyle Kuzma. I don't think Kuzma's value is very, very good right now. Again, I think expiring contracts are kind of the name of the game for some of these rebuilding teams. If Washington's willing to take bad salary or take in bigger salaries in return, they're going to get compensated with draft compensation. And the Wizards would be willing to throw Malcolm Brogdon into whatever deal it takes, get his money off their books, send it to some other team that's trying to dump salary ultimately for next season or the year after. And Washington could be the team that's willing to work with that. Now, I also considered Corey Kispert. If the Wizards made him available, I think a whole bunch of teams would really want to land Corey Kispert. He's a good player, excels in transition, I think defends better than most people give him credit for, and of course is a very, very good shooter. So that type of player fits on a lot of different playoff teams, although I'm just not sure if Washington actually really readily makes him available. That might be more of an off-season discussion. Malcolm Brogdon's expiring contract very likely will get moved at the deadline, and I think Washington's going to be active with him, Valanciunas. They'll try and be active with Kyle Kuzma, and I think it's setting up for a good trade deadline for the Washington Wizards here in 2025. I really hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to comment down below who you think will get traded, when and where. I want to hear your guys' thoughts, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.